We'll talk about Reform UK as well. Robert Jenrick, now their Treasury spokesman, he has been elevated to that role. A big U-turn from Reform UK today. They say they're going to actually, they are now against the against the scrapping, I should say, of the two-child benefit cap. So they would keep it. William Yarwood is with me. He's media campaign manager at the Taxpayers Alliance, and Jonathan Portes is professor of economics at King's College. We're asking the sort of wider question, really, of which party you trust to get the cost of living under control. William, what do you make of what Reform UK has been saying so far, particularly this U-turn?
Yeah, the U-turn was very interesting, Peter. I mean, I've just come from the Jenrick announcement, and I'll be quite honest with you, I actually didn't expect him to say that, especially since he joined Reform. He actually defended the policy, I think, in an interview on the BBC with Laura Kunsberg, and now seemingly he's said to Nigel, actually, I don't think this is the best way to go about it. And to be honest with you, Peter, it does actually make sense. You look at polling, the majority of people in the country actually, including Labour voters, don't actually support lifting the two-child benefit cap. And actually, when it comes to Reform voters, about 85% of them are actually in favour of keeping that two-child benefit cap in place. So, interestingly, Farage has been moved back to actually what I can probably guess is probably his original position on this issue by Robert Jenrick. But I think the issue more broadly with the Jenrick speech, and while I think it was a good speech, there was lots of good stuff in it, and I think Jenrick is taking the economy and finances seriously, I do think that there needs to be more discussion around the spending side of things. I know he mentioned foreign aid, I know he mentioned migration, I know he mentioned the administrative state with the size of the civil service, all stuff I wholeheartedly, and we at the TPA wholeheartedly agree on, Peter, but our national debt is 2.8 trillion. The debt interest on that is over £100 billion a year. And also, when you come to the welfare bill, that's going to go up and up and up, with the health and disability side of our benefits bill reaching £100 billion by the end of this decade. So what I want to hear from Reform is some serious areas where they're going to actually properly cut spending, not just headline chasing figures.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this is all 3 years away. Of course, Reform UK may or may not be the next government of this country, but it's right to look into what they're saying now, certainly in those economic plans. But I suppose maybe I could just ask you, which party do you trust, or which, if you go through the sort of what are now 4 main parties, well, 5 if you include the Liberal Democrats, actually, Lib Dems, Greens, Tories, Labour and Reform UK, on getting the cost of living under control? Because you're saying, and I think it's a very reasonable thing to say, that we need to hear more from Reform UK about spending cuts. They have said, of course, that money they get in, half of it will go into paying down the debt, half of it will go into spending cuts. But actually, there's a lot to examine from all the parties, isn't there?
Absolutely. I mean, the Tories presented, I think, a £47 billion spending cuts platform last year, which, by the way, Peter, I came away from Tory conference feeling quite positive about that. But again, we have a £63 billion budget deficit, debt is 2.8 trillion, £47 billion isn't going to touch the sides. And also, interestingly, at the Tory conference, Mel actually talked about how half of that would be used for tax cuts. Now, again, not against that, because that can possibly engender growth and actually possibly raise more money in the long term. Of course, you know, when in the 80s they, cut certain taxes, they actually ended up raising more money because people were more willing to actually pay it in the long term. But in regards to the cost of living crisis more specifically, I think that Reform needs to address some pretty key factors causing the cost of living crisis, namely actually the fact of why food's so high, obviously the hangover from COVID inflation, of course, energy prices, of course, due to Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and while I may like some of the net zero policies, the reversal of the net zero policies from Reform UK, there's no clear example of what they would do instead. When it comes to the Tories, of course, like I said, £47 billion, decent chunk of change to actually bring down the overall deficit and bring down the welfare state. But again, how are they going to keep inflation under control? How are they going to deal with the cost of living crisis in regards to energy, which, of course, when they were in government, they actually pursued a lot of these net zero policies in the first place.
Theresa May brought it in.
Exactly.
She brought in the legislation in regard to net zero. And the Greens and the Lib Dems, I mean, you've been looking at their spending plans?
Yes, I have. I think the Greens are so dramatically to the left of even the Corbyn-led Labour Party of yesteryear, and mainly because Zach Polanski actually doesn't believe in the way you fund the government. So Polanski is what's called a modern monetary theorist, Peter. He believes basically that government is not funded by taxpayers' money, it's essentially funded by itself because government has the sovereign right to to print its own money, basically. And therefore, actually, when money is printed, it's actually given out to people in Britain, and taxing it back is a way to make sure that inflation pressures don't occur.
I mean, that is just absolute nonsense.
It's complete crazy, but it has resonance with people, because with that kind of rhetoric, Peter, you can say we can have the Green New Deal, we can have a massive welfare state, we can have sunshine and rainbows, and therefore not actually properly address the cost of living crisis, the debt crisis, and the tax burden crisis we have in this country.
Who was the person who said they wanted to nationalise the economy?
That was Zara Sultana. That's your party,
yes.
which isn't even worth discussing as an area of them to get the policies down. Liberal Democrats, again, they're very committed to the net zero agenda. I know they did this Department for Growth thing, but I think that's more of a gimmick than anything else. And, while the Lib Dems may have been good on family farm tax, for example, they were really good on the employees' national insurance hike. They haven't really brought any serious long-term policies to actually bring down the cost of living crisis and bring down our debt and bring down our deficit overall. So while I'm being overly critical, that is kind of my job, Peter, I get that. But also, one other thing I would just quickly say, if you don't mind, you mentioned earlier that you're right, it is about 3 years out from the general election, so Reform and other parties perhaps don't need to talk about it. But Farage thinks there's going to be a general election in about a year or two's time, if not earlier. So, if he thinks that, surely he should be making his own party and his new spokespeople announce specific policies in order to build up a manifesto for that impending general election, which you think will come.
I think I agree with that, although in fairness to them, they've been in place for 24 hours, so perhaps we'll give them a little bit more time. William Yarwood, Media Campaign Manager at the Taxpayers Alliance, thank you for joining me. Listening to some of that is William Yarwood is leaving us, but Jonathan Portes is coming on. He's Professor of Economics at King's College. Jonathan, thank you for your time this afternoon. We're asking the question, which party do you trust to get the cost of living under control? What's the answer if I ask that question to you?
Well, I'm not going to pick a particular political party. I'm an economist. I will comment on, the big challenges that any party of government faces are how to restore growth, improve living standards, boost real wages, and that needs to be a combination of things. We need to increase house building, we need to increase infrastructure investment, we need to start building things, both houses and roads and sewers and reservoirs and so on. And some of what the government has done so far has been a good start there. They've talked a good game. They really need to get on and deliver. So that's one aspect of what needs to be done. The other is generally responsible fiscal policy. And again, the government has behaved reasonably sensibly here. We needed to increase spending because public services obviously had been run down very significantly under the previous government. There was significant, there were just big holes in the budget everywhere. Government needed to put up taxes to deal with it. It couldn't do what, Liz Truss tried to do.
Well, they could have, in theory, cut more public spending. I mean, we've got a public that is really hurting, as you will know, Jonathan, and we have the highest taxation since, as a proportion of GDP, since the Second World War. And from a practical perspective, so many of my viewers and listeners want to get the cost of living down. Any form of greater taxation is not going to help that from their perspective.
The tax burden is slightly up on what it has been trending for the last 2 or 3 decades. That's a natural consequence of demographics, a natural consequence of the fact that as we get older, we spend considerably more on pensions than the NHS. And you have to remember that the big drivers of the increases in public spending are, first of all, the state pension, second of all, the NHS, and overwhelmingly that NHS spending is driven by spending on older people. So that's what we're spending money on. Now, if you want to make big spending cuts in the money that goes to older people, you can. But we have to recognize that's quite a difficult political choice.
It's an incredibly difficult political choice, and I speak to so many people who've been in politics who say the triple lock is absurd and they should get rid of it, but show me the politician who wants to do that. I'm not saying it's absurd and they should get rid of it necessarily.
And there, I think, the government, I think, has done right, given the politics of it, given that it's very difficult to do anything, the government's done the right thing. It set up a pensions commission, and one would hope, we can't be sure, that as the pensions commission successfully did 20 years ago, that will be able to come up with something that commands a general political consensus.
If Keir Starmer acts as the triple lock, I will be extremely surprised. Jonathan, I just wonder, when we look towards Reform UK, which is of course leading in the polls, and they're talking about U-turning on the two-child benefit cap. Yes, an election may be 3 years away, or even a year and a half away, depending on what Nigel Farage thinks. But how closely have you looked at what they're saying, and what do you make of it?
Well, so I mean, I think, frankly, until they start, getting serious, it's very difficult to take them seriously. There's one particular example I'd like to point out, since it's something that I said publicly, indeed, on Nigel Farage's own TV station, which is that Nigel Farage claimed, on his signature policy of immigration, Nigel Farage claimed that only 1 in 6 of the immigrants who've arrived in the last, in the very period of very high immigration that we had under the Conservative government from 2022 to 2024.
The Boris wave.
That only 1 in 6 of them were working. Now, that is completely false. He said it several times. I've said several times on TV that that is a lie, and that if he wants to be taken remotely seriously on this issue,
what is the true figure?
He needs to correct it. The true figure is somewhere, we don't have the exact figure, but it's somewhere in the region of 60-65%. And we know that because we have data from HMRC on the number of people who are actually on payroll. So we actually literally know that these people are in work and paying taxes. So Farage is simply lying about this. Why should anybody, and the question I
Okay, you made that point 3 times now, and the next time I speak to Nigel Farage, I will ask him about it. Jonathan, what do you make of the two-child benefit cap and Reform UK's views on that, and the fact that they've done a U-turn on it?
Well, to be fair, the government, of course, did a U-turn on it as well. They said they weren't going to scrap it, and they did. So I won't criticize them. I mean, we know that the two-child benefit cap was the single biggest driver of the increase in child poverty we've seen over the last few years. You can have different views about when people should have children, why people should have children, and so on. But the fact is that the main impact of the benefit cap was to push children, through no fault of their own, into poverty. And I think scrapping it is one of the best things the government has done. It does cost money, and that money has to come from somewhere. We shouldn't look away from that. But I think it was very much the right thing to do, a worthwhile thing to do. And I personally am happy to pay higher taxes.
So where do we find the money from if you're going to go around cutting the two-child benefit cap and sorting out the cost of living? I mean, that's just going to be higher taxation, is it not, Jonathan? Or borrowing, which we can ill afford?
We certainly can't afford to borrow very much more in the current fiscal position. I agree with that. I think over time, over the medium, I don't think taxes need to go up right away. They're high enough already. Over the medium to long term, we need some combination of tax reform and probably somewhat higher taxation. As I said, that's driven primarily by the demographic pressures, the fact that we're just getting older, and that leads to greater spending on health and pensions.
Maybe the NHS could be a bit more efficient. Listen, thank you very much.
It should be, yeah.
Well, of course it should. Jonathan, thank you. Jonathan is a professor of economics at King's College in London, so thank you to him. What do you